So many of you have probably seen this video already. Preston Stewart did a great job lambasting the ridiculous Grom gun on a rusty trailer here. But I think there is something more indicative of the current problems Russia is facing on the ground with their military in this video. So I'm going to pause it, I'm going to back it up and show you exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this monstrosity of a vehicle. It looks like it's either a tractor or some sort of strange hybrid Jeep that they have thrown some parts on to make it a manageable truck. The problem for Russia is this is indicative of their logistics right now. And they are probably struggling to get things to their frontline troops. And when I say things, you often think of ammunition, trying to get equipment, trying to get repair parts to the front line, or even just moving people around. But there are additional third order effects that logisticians have to think of when it comes to the capability to move stuff. Now this is called a prime mover. This is a vehicle that tows something, whether it's towing a gun, whether it's towing water, fuel, brake bulk ammo, whatever. It's towing something, it's a prime mover. This type of prime mover cannot service large battlefields. Those are humongous containerized units, and Russia has these. But you notice they're big and heavy. Things like this janky tractor just ain't cutting. Well, you might say, hey Chad, this is just a one-off situation. Maybe these guys just don't have a lot of equipment. They're dismounted. They're maybe part of that convict military, so they're not getting the best equipment. And I say this is broadly indicative of the entire Russian military, because here we see them having World War II era motorcycles with sidecars being delivered. That's their medevac platform for Russia. That's the medevac platform, not any kind of Humvee style vehicle or JLTV or helicopters. It's a World War II era motorcycle with a sidecar. Now I fully understand this type of war does not lend itself to the same conditions that America fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. But we aren't even looking at Vietnam levels of logistics capability at this point. We're looking at World War II. And why I'm looking at World War II is because of one very specific thing that is required of militaries in this type of fight, and that is sanitation. And that is something that not many people think about, but is very logistics heavy. Now, a study analyzing U.S. military operations from 2001 to 2010 in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom showed that 3% of all American deaths were due to disease and non-battle injuries. The vast majority of fatalities over there were combat related. Now, when we pivot to the type of fighting Russia is engaged in Ukraine, that World War II style of fighting, where they're having to use sidecar medical carriers, where they're having to forego some of the sanitation requirements because they're in a trench warfare scenario, we use those World War II estimates. Well, in World War II, 20% of all deaths were due to disease. So of the 405,000 Americans that died in World War II, 114,000 were due to disease. Currently, Russia has between 100,000 and 150,000 troops living in trench warfare conditions. Now, sure, Russia does have civilian trucks that can get somewhat near the front line. We call them white trucks, but because of their lack of all-terrain capability or traverse across degraded roadway capability, they can't get all the way to the front line. So they must rely on tactical transport. U.S. military does the same thing. The problem for Russia is 75% of their tactical transport has been destroyed. So they are having to resort to alternative methods like this. The lawnmower-powered individual logistics system is what I'm calling it. So that begs the question, if they're using motorcycles with sidecars, lawnmower engine-powered sleds, monstrosity tractors to move things around the battlefield, how are they prioritizing things like sanitation? Because I can tell you as a logistician, stuff like that gets very low priority, but is very much something that we need to focus on. As I said before, 20% of the casualties in World War II were due to disease. So how are they controlling the things that bring animals like mice and rats or flies to their foxholes, to their trenches? We're not even focused on things like getting ammunition to the front line, because sure, they can break bulk ammo. They can have a centralized point where they take apart ammunition boxes and get them to the front line using these motorcycles. They can do that with food too. But stuff like this, aren't going to cut it when you're trying to pull bulk water for more than just drinking, for sanitary purposes, or even if you're trying to pull bulk fuel, which is why we're seeing less and less vehicles on the front lines moving for the Russians. They're using more dismounted human wave tactics. And one final thought that I know as a logistician, and all of the combat arms guys can back this up as true. If this is what they're using to pull their weaponry, which is always the priority, generals will always prioritize making sure their weapons are attached to a prime mover that is capable and able to get it on and off the battlefield as needed. What are they using for logistics? Because as a logistician, I know that logistics vehicles and capability is always on the back burner. I even wrote a paper imploring commanders to conduct support rehearsals for their maneuver operations, and the US Army published it. But I can tell you time and time again, logistics is left to the logisticians to just kind of figure it out, and if they have the equipment they need, so be it, just get me what I need. And that is probably what is happening in the Russian military. So when you see a prime mover pulling a gun looking like that, I can guarantee you their logistics prime movers are in worse shape.